Well, Ukraine's president says his country's internationally recognized borders will remain the same. In an address to the nation, Volodymyr Zelensky also called on Ukrainians not to be afraid.
With today's and possibly tomorrow's decisions, Russia is legalizing its troops, which have been de facto present in the occupied areas of Donbass since 2014. A country that has supported war for 8 years cannot maintain peace. There are now absolutely no reasons for chaotic actions. We'll do everything to keep it this way further on. We stick with the peaceful and diplomatic way. We'll only walk this way. We are at our land, and we are not afraid of anything and anyone. We don't owe anything to anyone. We won't give away anything to anyone. We are confident in this. We have been ready for everything for a long time. There's no reason for your sleepless night. Behind me is Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and it will remain the same, no matter what, no matter the statements and actions by Russia, just as we remain calm and confident.
Well, for the very latest on the ground in Ukraine, we cross live to the capital, Kiev, to join Associated Press correspondent Francesca Ebel. Francesca, what is the mood in Ukraine this morning after Putin recognized the pro-Russian breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine?
Well, the mood in Kiev today is quite muted. As you can see, it's a lovely day. There are people outside in the parks walking their dogs and playing with their children. You wouldn't really know what has been happening in the east of the country unless you spoke with people. Last night I spoke with the residents in the southern town of Odessa, and they told me that they were very sad about what had happened. They were very fearful about what comes next. But also, you've got to remember that Ukraine has actually been in a conflict for the past 8 years. So for many Ukrainians, they're very used to this idea of these regions being separate from Ukraine. So many Ukrainians will have woken up this morning not really feeling the difference.
And this decision comes after Putin held a long Security Council meeting, followed by a speech at the nation. Can you tell us a little more about the address?
Yes, so yesterday in Moscow, there was quite an extraordinary scene when Russian President Vladimir Putin met with his top security advisors and top officials to essentially, they said, decide the fate of Ukraine. And this Security Council meeting went on for about 5 hours and then was followed by a televised address to the nation, which seems to have been pre-recorded. And what essentially this was a very long and rambling, fact-bending sort of history lesson in which Putin said, well, Russia created Ukraine, Bolshevik Russia specifically created Ukraine, and that Ukraine inherited its lands from the historic motherland. He also said that in the last decade or decades, Ukraine had actually become a puppet of the West that was was a puppet of the West.
All right, talk to us. How will this decision impact Ukraine?
Well, I spoke with a political analyst this morning about how this decision will impact Ukraine going forward. At the moment, it's not exactly clear. It will all depend on the coming days and weeks. But in essence, he told me that the loss was mostly symbolic. It's never good when a country loses part of its territory. But also, you've got to remember that these regions are actually the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union. But he said that economically there won't be much of a loss because these industries in recent decades have declined. So generally, we'll have to wait and see to see the specific consequence of this decision for Ukraine.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation yesterday, telling Ukrainians not to be afraid. What's the mood like? How are they reacting to his speech? Are they reassured that they are safe?
Yes, so yesterday Zelensky gave a speech in which he told Ukrainians and the world that we are not afraid of anyone or anything. We don't owe anyone anything. And he also said we won't give anything to anyone. And I think that actually reflects the mood of a lot of Ukrainians that I've spoken with. A lot of them are very defiant, but they also feel unafraid. I was just in the port city of Odessa, where the Russian Black Sea Fleet are carrying out naval drills at the moment. And when you talk to people in the day-to-day, they really don't feel afraid. Daily life continues as normal. It's really business as usual. So at the moment, for a lot of Ukrainians, they're not really feeling the impact of the conflict that's happening in the east.
And any word or response or reactions from the US, the UK, and other NATO allies with this new decision?
Yes, so yesterday the UN Security Council held a rare nighttime emergency meeting at the request of Ukraine. And the US ambassador to the UN said that this decision was an attempt to create a pretext for further invasion. Now we'll have to wait and see whether this is indeed what will happen. At the moment, there is also talk of a potential summit between US President Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. Biden has said that he agreed in principle to meeting with Putin, but this will depend on if the Kremlin actually refrains from a full-scale invasion.
All right, talk to us. The US have said sanctions will follow. Some are skeptical about the level of sanctions. What do we expect to be meted out to Russia?
It's a good question. At the moment, we will have to wait and see. I think that Ukraine is hoping for very strict sanctions, but at the moment it will very much depend on the coming days and weeks, and it very much depends also on whether Vladimir Putin and the Russian troops that have been sent in as quote unquote peacekeepers will actually cross that border in the separatist regions.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your answers and for keeping us up to speed with what's going on in Kiev, Francesca.